me, Alex Last. And today we go back to the late 1970s for an inside account of a defining moment in East African history when Somalia fought Ethiopia in the Ogaden War. One evening in December 1974, a top Somali general, Mohamed Noor Galal, drove to a dinner party in the capital Mogadishu to meet a special guest who just arrived in the country. That guest was Admiral Sergei Gorshkov, a top Soviet official, the head of the Soviet Navy, who'd come to deliver a message from Moscow. This is General Galal's account of what happened next.
He said they wanted to get revenge on America because America had displaced the Soviets as Egypt's main ally and taken over their bases. He turned to us and said, "What is required of you is that the Horn of Africa is to be liberated from the imperialist." He said, "We know that you are missing territory and that it is with Ethiopia. Liberate your country. Ask us for whatever you need, arms and everything you need, we will provide."
Back then, Somalia was a strong centralized state and an ally of the Soviet Union, while Ethiopia was an ally of the United States. The missing territory Somalia craved was the Ogaden, then a neglected region of Ethiopia which bordered Somalia. The Ogaden had ended up under Ethiopian control, yet it had an overwhelmingly Somali population, many of whom wanted to be part of Somalia. The government in Mogadishu also fundamentally believed in the idea of a greater Somalia. And the timing was good too. Ethiopia was in turmoil, following the fall of Emperor Haile Selassie. So the Somalis liked the plan, and General Galal became one of the architects of the military operation. The first step was to mobilize the local Somali rebel forces in the Ogaden, the Western Somali Liberation Front.
By 1977, the freedom fighters had completed their mission. They cleared all of the Ethiopian army from the nomad territories and the villages and the wells. They concentrated the Ethiopian army in the big settlements and towns, and roads were blocked and supplies were cut off. It was now the time for Somalia's national military to go into action.
But then, on the eve of invasion, the game changed. Because inside Ethiopia, a new brutal leader had emerged from a bitter power struggle. His name was Colonel Mengistu, and he was looking for Soviet support. Moscow saw a chance to replace the Americans as Ethiopia's chief ally and promised to be Mengistu's backers. But now Moscow was allied to both Ethiopia and Somalia, and they desperately tried to put the brakes on the Somali invasion.
Something changed in Russia, but we rejected all of this. The military and all of the freedom fighters went in. We were not in a position to retract.
General Galal, you trained in the Soviet Union. How did you feel when the Soviets withdrew their support?
I did not have a relationship with them. I was not one of those personnel who went to their homes and had drinks with them. The other thing was that I was committed to this cause, and when it became apparent that they were changing sides, we became estranged. There was an element of betrayal.
The Somalis would not back down. The invasion began on the 23rd of July 1977, with 30,000 men backed by tanks and aircraft, and initially the Somali forces swept the Ethiopian army before them. Within weeks, they had captured almost all of the Ogaden.
We soon found out, heading into the Ogaden's interior, why the Somali supply lines to the front are so strained. There are few roads. Khalifa was a typical Ethiopian garrison town with a fort in a commanding position. The Ethiopians fled or were killed last July.
I was worried, but we disbanded the Ethiopian army fairly quickly, although they outnumbered us, as they numbered about 60,000. But their artillery and training was very, very weak. When shots were exchanged, they got out of the tanks and ran off. They abandoned well-stocked tanks. We did not know the mountainous regions. The rain and the coldness of the mountains was hard to bear. It was a very, very difficult situation, but the men were fighting and soldiering on.
With their new clients, the Ethiopians in trouble, the Soviets tried to mediate.
The Soviets called and spoke with Siad Barre and said, "Stop, and take what is already in your possession," which was around 95%, "and with regard to what remains, we will mediate between you and Mengistu, and know that we are on your side." But Siad Barre rejected this.
In November 1977, Somalia announced that relations with the Soviet Union had broken down. The Soviets now switched all their support to Ethiopia. Hundreds of tanks, artillery and aircraft were brought in. A Soviet general, 1,500 military advisors, plus 16,000 Cuban troops all joined the Ethiopian side. General Galal knew the implication.
When I heard the radio that night, when it was said that the Russians had been asked to leave Somalia, I realized then that our operation would not succeed.
And in February 1978, the Soviet-backed Ethiopian forces launched a counterattack to reclaim the Ogaden. No longer part of the Soviet bloc, the Somali government desperately appealed for assistance from the United States and NATO. Some was promised, little was forthcoming.
From childhood, the people of the Ogaden learned to use guns. However, there aren't enough modern weapons and ammunition to equip these enthusiastic units. There's still a blind but touching faith that somehow the West will send supplies.
It looks to me as if this is going to be a very long war.
It looks to you, but if it's become a long war, we are sure that we will win always.
But suppose
Even if it takes 10 years, our people, the last man, the last woman, the last children will fight against the colonialist Ethiopia.
But supposing the Ethiopians come back to this place,
They won't be back, please. Don't say this. I'm sure that they won't be back here.
But the main Somali army was defeated and forced to pull out. The war was over. Thousands had been killed on the two sides. Refugees poured into Somalia, though guerrilla forces continued to fight in the Ogaden for years to come.
To this day, I am sorry that this had happened to us. We suffered from political failure, but not from a military failure. Also, Siad Barre's bad politics crushed everything.
Don't you think you were responsible for what happened?
Definitely. Myself and those senior to me do bear responsibility. I am sorry, and your question of who is responsible, Somalis are responsible for entering the war, but we were betrayed.
The Ogaden War would turn out to be a defining moment in Somali history, because in the aftermath, Siad Barre began to lose his grip on the country, which slowly descended into a civil war from which Somalia is still to recover. Now in his 70s, General Galal still advises on military affairs. He still lives in Somalia.
By God, I saw a lot of events and a lot of hardship which has left a bad memory. The consequences of it stand to this day.
General Mohammed Noor Galal, ending this edition of Witness with me, Alex Last. For more of our history programmes, just search for BBC Witness.
This is the BBC World Service.